Okay, interesting article from ICV2. Are comic book movies over? Why are we asking that question? Well, because movie theaters are kind of like almost all closed. There's a couple that are open. There are a few states that have movie theaters in them, but none of them are doing well enough. And there's a big problem going on because comic book movies, for one thing, they tend to be big budget, superhero movies especially. For another thing, like, they need movie theaters. If they don't have movie theaters, how are they going to make comic book based big movies anymore? It's an interesting question. This comes from ICV2. I like this guy, Rob Salkowitz. He does write some interesting articles. I don't always agree with him on everything, but he brings up some interesting points. This is from, again, ICV2. Let's get into the article. Before we do, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications. If you want to support my work, I appreciate you doing that. It keeps me inspired to keep making more cool videos. All right, so last week, Cineworld, the parent company of Regal Theaters, had finally seen enough after studios put off releasing the latest installment of the James Bond franchise following the postponements and limited releases of most 2020 movies, including Wonder Woman 1984 and Black Widow. The UK-based chain decided to shutter all of its 536 US theaters along with most of its facilities in Great Britain until further notice. So they're literally temporarily closing down all their operations. Cineworld is like the number 2 movie theater chain. AMC is the number 1 movie theater chain. AMC has been keeping its movie theaters open. But, for how long is a question. They've announced that they have 6 months left of cash unless something special happens, and then they've run out of money, and then they're in big trouble. Some of these operations, like Cineworld, just because they close everything and they lay off all their employees, they still have some expenses. So they have some cash, I'm sure, that they're working off of, but it ain't good. So obviously that impacts everything. Here's a quote. The prolonged closures due to COVID-19 pandemic have had a detrimental impact on the release slate for the rest of the year and in turn our ability to supply our customers with the lineup of blockbusters they've come to expect from us, said Cineworld CEO Mookie Greendeer. As such, Mookie, what a name. As such, it's simply impossible to continue operations in our primary markets. Though Greendinger emphasized, Mookie Greendinger emphasized that the move was temporary, the company has lost gigantic chunks of money and seen its stock price plummet from more than $275 last year to a low of $22 following the announcement on Monday, October 5th. The company had also had to temporarily lay off. But it's going to be permanent, of course. I mean, they can't bring these people, 40,000 workers in the U.S. and 5,000 in the U.K. per NPR. So they're letting go a lot of people. If there's no movie screens, there can be no box office. Seems obvious, but it is a good point. Theater owners have been hoping for government relief, but without the latest COVID bailout measures going through, the National Association of Theater Owners estimated that 70% of small and mid-sized cinemas could face bankruptcy if studios continue to withhold their biggest features while waiting for the climate to improve. Just today, B&B Theaters, the 6th largest chain in the U.S., said it's just months away from bankruptcy. They're all months away from bankruptcy. The problem is, they're retail. They're sitting there, they're like, okay, hey, we have movie theaters. Who's got movies? Who wants to see these movies? They're a platform, right? But if they have to be able to supply movies to people that want to see movies. If they don't have movies to supply, they got no platform. They're not in business. Now, movie makers are like, all right, hey, that's cool. We're happy to give you movies. The problem is these freaking things cost anywhere from $100 to like $250 million to make a single movie. And if mostly people are afraid to go to movie theaters, or if mostly like a lot of movie theaters are closed, or you've got like the state of New York that's very restrictive or closing down all those movie theaters. California, there's problems. There's problems all over the country where there are like statewide lockdowns. So you can't get distribution for a film because the theaters aren't open. It's not good. Obviously, the pandemic has had a crushing impact on all kinds of businesses, especially ones that rely on large public gatherings. If you're running a retail shop or a convention, perhaps the fate of movie theaters isn't your top worry at the moment. Yeah, who cares about movie theaters? Well, it matters, but Problem is, a huge amount of the comics business now depends on the comic-to-screen pipeline. Publishers and creators depend heavily on the promise of extra revenue from film options, especially now that a lot more of those options are being greenlit. The prospect of big box office revenues has driven industry consolidation and partnerships ranging from the multi-billion-dollar Disney, Marvel, and AT&T Warner DC deals to the stakes that Chinese companies have taken in Dark Horse and Valiant. And just so you know, because Rob don't know, no offense, Rob, but Valiant's stake turned into an acquisition. So Valiant is 100% owned by a company that's financed by China. Though streaming has taken center stage over the past 18 months, and particularly since the pandemic has turned us all into binge watchers, the real money comes from feature films. Right, because streaming is fine, but streaming doesn't generate $1 billion box office for a single movie, or $2 billion, or $500 million. Streaming generates subscription income, but most of the big streamers are operating at a loss as they are forced to outbid competitors for the next hot series. In addition, most of the big services don't run commercials, cutting off another traditional source of income. Until there's a shakeout, the whole side of the business is a giant loss leader. There are other problems, too, about like talent relationships. So, for example, with Trolls, that came out from Universal direct-to-consumer through PVOD, which is basically paid video on demand for rentals. They made participation deals, profit deals, where if they reach a certain amount of box office, then there are certain bonuses that are paid to producers, that are paid to actors and stuff. But when they put it through a streaming service, the revenue gets all messed up. It's not the same. So even if it were the same amount, which it's not, the contracts are not targeted. Contracts that they make that anticipate theatrical distribution in movie theaters, the money isn't the same. They don't get the same money. So the participants, they're not 100% happy with this either. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Superheroes need super budgets. Superhero movies are another matter. The MCU has been a money machine since the late aughts. Love that word, aughts. And DC seems to have righted the ship with recent billion-dollar bonanzas like Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Shazam. Those films cost a lot to make and market, but they pay off big time and drive massive licensing revenues on ancillary merchandise. They also keep the IP front of mind for folks who want to sample the comics or graphic novels, even if that dynamic hasn't resulted in gigantic publishing windfall like we would have all liked to see by now. But yeah, I mean, obviously building the DCU, building a DC movie universe is very, very valuable for DC. They would love to do it, but what are you going to do? You can't. Problem is when the studios have already paid out the production costs on the next 3 years worth of big budget blockbusters and suddenly can't sell tickets at $18 to $25 a pop because all the theaters are shut down, that has a ripple effect. Think about a bunch of semi-trucks jackknifing at high... That's a terrible thing to think about. At high speed on a crowded freeway, and you get the idea. Well, the problem is, yeah, they've made huge investments in making the movies, obviously. So they filled their distribution pipeline. They have a lot of stuff in the works. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And what are they going to do? They can't just stick them out in a few theaters and not make money. Warner Brothers tried this with Tenet, and Tenet supposedly has done $300 million worldwide. It's not enough for what the budget is and the costs of marketing. I mean, you can understand there's a lot of, movie theater shut down. It's fine, and it would have done a lot better in other circumstances. But so what? Same thing with Valiant with their Bloodshot movie. They were happy with the results of Bloodshot, but not as happy as they could have been. They were supposed to launch a whole movie universe. You can't have no universe if you don't have a way to distribute your content. For the studios, holding back on the release dates is the only thing that makes business sense. If you can see the pileup coming, you hit the brakes. You don't just ram into the traffic jam at full speed. Yet, there are options like moving the films to streaming or pay-per-view, as Disney did with Mulan, to no great effect. But doing so just locks in big revenue losses that may never be recouped. Well, yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about maybe we'll take certain films and we'll put them on streaming, and maybe we'll charge a rental fee, or maybe we'll just put them on for streaming for the regular subscribers and build the subscriber base. Disney's figuring all that out for what they want to do, but it's crazy times in the film industry. However, holding back the releases risks having the distribution channel collapse, and maybe permanently. And it's frankly difficult to imagine anyone reinvesting and bringing movie theaters back at a scale after billions in investments have been lost and the companies with the management skills to run a cinema chain have gone under. Well, look. Cineworld is carrying, if I'm not mistaken, like $8.2 billion in, I think it was acquisition debt. So they borrowed money to buy the company. I believe that's where its debt came from. It's got like $8 billion in debt. That's the second biggest theater chain. They're not paying that debt back. You know, they could file a bankruptcy, get rid of all that debt, and have some new money come in, like Disney buying it. I would really predict, and I did another video about this, but I can nearly guarantee you that Disney or Universal, or maybe Disney and Universal, will each buy a theater chain out of bankruptcy. And it'll take 6 months or a year, whatever they're going to do with the health event. And then they'll be back in operation and they'll have distribution for their films because they can legally do that now. It was decided a few months ago that it's okay for studios to now own their own theaters. It's a big update. Back to the Future. If that happens, we may not see investments in big budget movies at a scale we've become accustomed to for a long time. Studios won't spend hundreds of millions of dollars to produce movies if there are no screens that can earn those investments back. Well, that's kind of obvious. To the extent that feature film profits help cover investments in streaming productions, those will see their belts tighten as well. The collateral damage in Hollywood from talent fees to agencies, special effects houses could be extreme. I imagine some people might react to this with a great sigh of relief. Hollywood's megabucks era has come at a high artistic cost. Maybe a bit of downsizing would bring back the gritty independent-style cinema of the 60s and 70s, which produced a lot of classic films. Very few of them, however, were the kind of effects-heavy sci-fi, fantasy, and superhero movies that have thrust comics-based content into the hearts of 21st century pop culture. But honestly, as successful as Marvel is, as successful as the DC films are, they're still not selling comics somehow. There's no coordination between the comics publishing, as the great Cecil has said, and Ethan Van Sciver, of course, and the movies and the comics publishing have not been in sync properly. And this has been for decades because they get so crazy after the movie money. They're like, well, who cares about the comics? It's like, well, that's understandable. But the problem is if you don't care about what's grounded, like the original fundamental content, then like you don't get these extra ancillary benefits. The fans are great because the fans will tell you what's good with the content and what's not good with the content. The comics were like really the North Star to keep everything running right. And when they just decided they would make movies that had nothing to do with the comics and not try to sync the two, they really gave up a good control mechanism to make sure everything was going to be consistent and good, and people would be heavily invested in what they were doing. Can the comics publishing and retail industry survive an extinction level event high up in the food chain? Sure, comics have made it through worse. Well, yes, because we've got crowdfunding now. Crowdfunding is absolutely booming. COMICSGATE is bigger than ever. Hashtag COMICSGATE. Check it out on Twitter. Check my playlist about COMICSGATE in my all of my YouTube descriptions. And yeah, it's huge. I have comics coming out too. But think about how many new comics imprints have spun up over the last few years predicated on the show business economics to sustain their publishing and talent strategies. Without the air cover afforded by movies and entertainment, the business of comics would look a lot different. There have been a lot of companies that have basically just been putting out comics as promo pamphlets to be TV shows and films. But there's another whole aspect to this, which is TV and film production is screwed up because of the pandemic. They can't film as many movies as they want to film. The studios want new content being produced right now because it takes time. So they know that they need a pipeline to fill, even if it means like, all right, we're not sure what the situation is with theaters. They want to continue developing content because if they're not making content, they're in trouble. They've got to put content out. But are they going to do that? Well, that's a whole other element is all the health problems with filming right now. Not quite time to roll the credits. Last week, news from Regal and Cineworld and the increasingly dire warnings from others in the movie theater business are sounding the alarm in hopes that policymakers ride to the rescue with short-term relief. That remains a possibility. Certainly, investors in the stock market haven't ruled out a political solution, even if it looks dire at the moment. I'm going to tell you now, I am not expecting any bailout for movie theaters. And I don't think you should expect it. You should expect bankruptcy for movie theaters. That's the most natural thing. But they will restructure the businesses. They will close some bad theaters, but they'll keep 80% of the good theaters in a bankruptcy. And then new money will come in, probably from the studios. The film companies are not... The film companies have billions of dollars still. For whatever reason, no matter what's going on, Disney always has cash. Netflix has endless amounts of cash. Someone's going to put up the $500 or $600 million it would take to refinance like AMC or refinance Cineworld or whatever these other little chains are, and they'll save them. But they're not going to pay their debts. They're going to make them do a bankruptcy first. It's also possible that our efforts to mitigate the effects of the pandemic won't be as ruinous as they seem. Cinema industry spokespeople have observed there have been no cases of COVID-19 linked to movie theaters or film screenings yet, but they haven't had any theaters open. And many theaters now offer large seats spaced far enough apart for safe social distancing. That's not viable. It's possible that the big cities have also been far behind most restrictive. Okay. Yeah, well... there's good hope that maybe things will work out, and it's nice that Rob is optimistic here, but what's going to happen, my prediction is, tell me what you think in the comments below. I think these movie theaters, they're obviously not going to burn them down or repurpose them into restaurants, right? Or turn them into churches or something. So the movie theaters that exist just basically exist. The ones that are shutting down temporarily will either get a political bailout, or they'll just do a bankruptcy and there'll be some new investment money that comes in, and it'll be operated by someone who wants access to those movie screens, which is probably going to be a Disney, a Netflix. Netflix, very unlikely that Netflix would do it. Amazon might do it. Amazon's always up to some sort of mischief, but some big media company will write a check after a bankruptcy. That's my take. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. Also, if you want to support my work, you can check out College of the Dead Graduation Day and check out my Zombie Apocalypse series. Also, you can sign up at epicmermaids.com for The Mermaids. It's coming soon. It's full color. It's like Game of Thrones with mermaids. I know you will love it. Why don't you check it out? I will see you again soon with another video, and if I don't see you, I will miss you.